Well, today our topic is entitled Global Power Competition, and we are most honored to have with us this evening a speaker who has served in our government at the highest level of any of our speakers thus far. Admiral John Richardson served as the 31st Chief of Naval Operations and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. After dinner, I'll turn over the mic to our moderator, Captain Barry Brown, who will introduce our speaker in more detail and moderate the discussion that you're all going to be a part of tonight. But first, I just want to say a few words about our agenda. First of all, in just a couple of minutes, the outstanding Heritage Ranch staff will begin service for dinner, and you'll notice that we have a no-host bar in the room in addition to tea or water, whatever works for you. And our programs also generate lots of questions, and we normally shoot to end around, about 7 o'clock or thereabouts. However, tonight, since we have such a wide-ranging topic, we're probably going to have to extend that just a bit. Again, depending on the weather, whatever we need to do, everybody's going to be flexible. So please feel free to get up and take a break if necessary during the program here tonight. Once the program is concluded, please know that you're all welcome to stay and use this as an opportunity to network and talk with our guest speaker and the representatives of our sponsoring organizations. And finally, we will have our drawing a little later on tonight, our 50-50 raffle winner and our door prize, so please don't leave early. That said and done, I simply say to you all, those that served, again, thank you for your service, and those that you did not, those who did not are just here to be a part of what has become a very, very special event on Sunday afternoon and Sunday evenings. Thank you for being here. For whatever reason you chose to be a part of it, we're delighted to welcome you all. Enjoy the fellowship at your respective table. Enjoy your dinner, and we'll get back with our program very shortly. Thanks, everybody.
And we'll get started. First thing I want to do is give you a little information on the rest of what we call Season 2 of the National Defense Briefing Series. You might remember that the finale of our series is a presentation of the annual Congressman Sam Johnson Defender of Freedom Award. Last year we presented it to our favorite Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Scott Murray, and with the help of Dallas Cowboy legend Bob Lilly, if you remember that. This year we've selected an equally outstanding recipient, and somebody most of you will recognize, and he has accepted the award. We'll announce that name in just a few weeks, and we had originally planned to present that at our next program in the summertime, but due to a number of factors, we're planning on moving that back toward the end of September. In the interim, we're going to plan another strategic discussion here in June. And because of the late change, we don't have it quite nailed down yet. We've got a couple of great options, and I guarantee it'll be a topic that you'll be interested in. And the date will be June 11th. So put that in your calendar. Stay with us. Check the website. Look for an email announcement about that event, and also the date for the final date for the Defender of Freedom Award. So Q&A. We will use the same Q&A procedure that we've used in the past. You have several ways to ask a question. First, you can submit questions anytime through the email address that's on the screen, ndbsquestions@gmail.com. They'll get passed to me, and we'll leave the slide up so you can write that down. Second, there are question cards on every table, so feel free to write down your question, hold up the card, and a runner will come around and gather those and get them to me. And then finally, we will have some microphones at the audience. If you have the opportunity to ask a question via the mic, please wait until we get the microphone to you, because we record all of these events, and we want to be sure we get your question clearly for the recording. And please, if you ask a question, make it a question and not a speech. The experience has shown that we'll usually have many more questions than we have time for. And we usually, as you know, try to stop around 7 o'clock. That's another reason why we're starting a little earlier, to make sure we make enough time for you to have questions. And we will closely monitor the weather and figure out whether we need to do something different. But we're going to shoot for that same 7 o'clock starting time. And if things go well, we'll go a little longer. And as I mentioned, we will videotape the presentation and discussion, and we'll post it to our website once our speakers had a chance to review it and approve it. So, next slide. Our program today is titled The Global Power Competition. There could not be a topic more on point for the environment in which we live today. The 2022 National Security Strategy describes the threats to vital U.S. national security interests posed by the, quote, pacing challenge of China and the, quote, acute threat, unquote, of a resurgent Russia. We all know that there have been developments on both of those topics very recently. And of course, the Middle East and North Korea are always simmering out there somewhere. So while the national security strategy integrates the traditional elements of national power, it is the military element that underpins all the rest. And it's the ultimate guarantor of national security. So how we structure and employ that military in an increasingly contested and competitive global environment is arguably our most important national security challenge. Admiral John Richardson, as you heard earlier, served as our 31st Chief of Naval Operations from 2015 until his retirement in 2019, and previously served as the Director of the Navy's Nuclear Reactor Program. During his career, he held command at every level of the submarine force. And by the way, you may recall one of our speakers from the last event, Admiral James Fogo, was also a submariner. Now, that was just a coincidence, but maybe it speaks to the relevancy of the submarine force in today's world. As CNO, our speaker helped shape the Navy we have today. And as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he served as an advisor to the President of the United States and to the Secretary of Defense on the employment of the Joint Force. He holds master's degrees from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and the National War College. He serves on the board of Boeing and numerous other commercial and nonprofit organizations. Admiral Richardson, we're pleased and honored to have you with us. We'll start with your opening remarks and then open the floor to questions. Please help me welcome Admiral John Richardson.
Well, Barry, thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back all right if I speak like this? You good? Okay, great. What a pleasure it is to be here. I want to thank Barry for inviting me. Scott, you're just the best MC. This is a super high-class event. You know, you get invited to speak at a lot of places. This is absolutely world-class. And I'm very mindful that I am following in the wake of Admiral Fogo, one of the greatest thinkers and best presenters in really the world, since he served all over the world, as you learned. And I just want to tell you up front that I am not even going to try and keep up, okay? That's just not going to happen. And then, you know, also this great weather that we're having. I just want to tell you a weather story. So we used to, one of the submarines I served on was the USS George C. Marshall. It was a ballistic missile submarine, carried nuclear missiles on it, and it was 1/3, you know, the submerged leg of what we call the strategic triad, right? So we have ground-based missiles, ICBMs, we have bombers, and we have the submarines. And just the technology of the day, the missiles only had a certain range, and so we operated that part of our Navy out of bases in one place was Holy Loch, Scotland, right? So we would go up to the Firth of Clyde, and it was something like out of a James Bond movie. You know, you'd be sauntering through the highlands of Scotland. It was absolutely beautiful, and you could smell the peat in the air, and you know, you're just thinking about getting that first taste of whiskey. Then you would come over the hill to Holy Loch, and in the middle of the loch was this giant U.S. submarine base. I mean, there was a tender, there was a floating dry dock, there was a whole squadron of submarines, and we would operate in and out of there. And one winter, and most of the time we operated kind of in the North Atlantic, and one winter we were just, I mean, it was the worst winter and prolonged time at sea I had ever had. You know, we were down around 200 feet deep, and we were still being tossed around like we were on the surface. We were taking 20-degree rolls at 200-foot depth. That's how strong and powerful the waves were at the time. And sometimes a big trough would come through, you know, and we would just go from 200 feet to the surface as this wave would just scoop us out of the deep and put us on the roof. And so it was just awful. And, you know, stuff was always flying around the ship. Anything that wasn't tied down was flying through the air. Meals, as you can imagine, were just a disaster during that time. And it lasted pretty much the entire winter patrol, 80 days straight, right? We were subjected to this. And in fact, the captain had a great idea that, hey, let's try and, surface the ship and see if we can surface, when we were finally going back into port, let's surface early. And I said, Captain, that's the absolute worst idea I've ever heard. But we did it anyway because he's the captain. And certainly, sure enough, it got 10 times worse. So it was like, okay, that was a terrible idea. Let's get back down. Anyway, we did that. We finished it. You kind of chalk it up to experience. But then I'm, sometime later, I'm watching that movie, The Perfect Storm. Have you ever seen that movie with George Clooney, The Perfect Storm? And, I'm watching this thing, and, I was just mildly interested. My wife was way more interested in George Clooney. And, but then I was like, wait a second. And I was doing the math. That's the dang storm that we were underneath. We were submerged in the perfect storm. So compared to that, this is almost nothing, right? We'll hack it through. All right. Well, I do want to get through the remarks pretty quickly so that we can get to questions. I always enjoy the Q&A the best. And whatever one of those methods you choose, I look forward to having a great conversation with you. But I thought what I'd start to talk about, just frame my remarks in terms of, the national security environment being defined by what I'll call sort of 3 major inflection points that are going on. And I want to harken back to, as Barry said, I'm involved in, the private sector and business as much as anything else now. And doing a lot of leadership counseling and those sorts of things at kind of the CEO level. And one CEO that's really always, I've always admired was Andy Grove. Anybody familiar with Andy Grove? Andy Grove, just a super impressive person, immigrated to the United States from Hungary, okay? And came over, and worked in New York as a busboy. Met his wife there. She was a waitress. They got married and remained married until Andy Grove passed away. He came to the United States hungry because he had this hunger to learn, right? He was a learning person. A passion for learning is what he talked about. And he thought that the United States, of every place in the world, was a place that you could come and really, live out a vision of a passion for learning. He earned his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the City College of New York. That's pretty challenging for someone who's, does English as a second language. You're just learning this all on the fly. Graduated and got his PhD from Berkeley in chemical engineering. And then he was one of the first 3 employees at a company that you may be familiar with called Intel, okay? So he becomes one of the first 3 at Intel, and he was the 3rd CEO of Intel, all right? And he's really credited with having transformed Intel. Intel used to be a big memory chip maker, and that's how they made their living. And it was Andy Grove during his time as CEO. He saw that the winds were changing, that they were not going to be able to compete with the Japanese at the time in terms of providing memory chips at cost. And so he shifted the entire company over to making microprocessors for PCs, for servers, and just for general purpose computing. And that strategic shift that he drove almost single-handedly it resulted in a 4,500% increase in their market capitalization from $4 billion when he took it over to almost $200 billion when he finished his time, making it like the 7th largest company in the world at the time, 64,000 employees. He did a lot of reinvestment into research and development. He wrote a couple of fantastic books, if you like to read books like that. One is called High Output Management, and the other one is called Only the Paranoid Survive, okay? True, right? Okay. I want to talk about just a few, I'm going to quote Mr. Grove from his own history. Listen to this. By the time I was 20, I had lived through a Hungarian fascist dictatorship, German military occupation, the Nazis' final solution, the siege of Budapest by the Soviet Red Army, a period of chaotic democracy in the years immediately after the war, a variety of repressive communist regimes, and a popular uprising that was put down at gunpoint, where many young people were killed, countless others were interned, and some 200,000 Hungarians escaped to the West, and I was one of them, okay? And in that book that he wrote called Only the Paranoid Survive, he's talked about a lot of things about his time as CEO of Intel. And of course, you know, like any boss, he was concerned with efficiency, and he was concerned with, you know, production, and he was concerned with the workforce. He was concerned with what the competition was doing, all of those things. But he said, you know, as the CEO, what he was really concerned about was missing what he called a strategic inflection point, okay? And I'll quote him again. For now, let me just say that a strategic inflection point is a time in the life of an organization when its fundamentals are about to change. That change can mean an opportunity to rise to new heights, but it may just as likely signal the beginning of the end, okay? This is a guy who knew a little bit about strategic inflection points. If you just think about everything he had to live through before he was 20 years old, right, and he came to the United States. And so, you know, and we've seen how this unfolds, particularly in the business world, right? Think of Kodak, think of Blockbuster, right? They didn't see it coming and were shuttered in an amazingly fast period of time. Conversely, you can think of Netflix, Google, Amazon, a whole host of companies, and you can think of Intel, who made this strategic switch from memory chips to semiconductors. A total transformation is needed. And I see it right now. We are in the midst of 3 inflection points, and if we're not sharp, we're in danger of missing the boat on all of them. The 3 that I'll talk about are a global strategic inflection point, a technological inflection point, and then I think I'll call it a domestic inflection point. And the thing about these things is it's not like they happen all the time, right? There are not many historical precedents to guide our thinking with respect to these. There's not many examples, right? But it's absolutely critical that as a nation we get this right, or at least, the very least, we get it more right than our adversaries. And the team that gets these right really sets the global agenda for 50 to 75 years, if you just kind of think about it, all right? And so let's get started. First one is this global strategic inflection point, or geopolitical, maybe more accurately. And this geographic shift is, you know, nobody will be surprised, this shift towards the Indo-Pacific region of the world, okay? And we'll just sort of, you know, run through some statistics to back up that assertion. But I'll tell you anecdotally, one of the things that really struck me, big impact, was when I was the Chief of the Navy, we went to visit my counterpart in the Indonesian Navy, right? We stayed in Jakarta. And, you know, our biological clocks were all completely messed up. And so, you know, I just found myself looking out my hotel room at 2 in the morning in the middle of Jakarta. We were downtown. And you looked out there, and it was as busy as 2 in the morning as it was at any time during the day. I mean, it was just, the traffic was, you know, absolutely busy. People were in every nook and cranny of that city. People were making money. They had some kind of business set up in every corner. You know, have you been to Jakarta? I see you some. Yeah. Is that about right? Yeah. And so, and it's just struck me, you know, as I was sitting there, this is a city, a mega city, right? More than 100 million people. That, you know, more of the world is like this than it is in Dallas, where we are here, or in Washington, D.C., where I live, et cetera. So let's just run down some numbers. Before this decade is over, 2/3 of the world's population and 2/3 of the global economy will be centered in Asia. 4 of the 5 largest economies in the world will be anchored to the Indo-Pacific. 7 of the world's 10 largest militaries, including the United States, which is a Pacific nation, are located in the Indo-Pacific right now. 92% of the semiconductors, particularly the high-end ones, come from Taiwan. China, talk a little bit about them, I'm sure, in the Q&A. They already control 55% of the world's rare earth mining and 85% of the refining of those minerals. Okay, let's go back to Jakarta, right? We were talking just today at dinner about rush hour in Dallas, right? So there's this, population that lives in the suburbs of Dallas and then every morning gets up and commutes into their workplace in Dallas, right? So there's a number of people that do that in Dallas, and there's a number of people that do that in Jakarta as well, right? And the population that commutes from the suburbs of Jakarta into Jakarta to work each day is bigger than the population of Estonia, all right? That's a big city when the rush hour is bigger than the population of another entire nation, okay? A couple other things. Because of gender imbalance, right? This one-child policy in China has really sort of started to have a deep impact on their demographics. And when you say you can only have one child, everybody engineers it one way or the other to have a boy, all right? And so there's this tremendous imbalance in their young population. In fact, there are more unwed men in China because of this than there were people in Ukraine, the entire population of Ukraine, all right? That's hard to manage, that type of imbalance. And it's the only nation that can surpass that is a nation like India, where there are more unwed men than there are in the entire nation of South Korea. Okay, so we're at this kind of inflection point where a lot of the activity, the population, the demographics, the economic engine, and the militaries are becoming more and more centered on the Indo-Pacific region. And I think that, as I accepted Barry's kind invitation to come here and speak, it was some time ago, right? But, most people, I think, were starting to get, a clear picture of this. But since the invasion of Ukraine, I think, and China's role in that, I think that it's becoming almost impossible to deny that things have changed and not entirely in our favor. Okay? I said it's geopolitical. That's the geo part, just moving towards the Pacific. The political part also, I think, gets our attention. And so there's this organization called the Freedom House. And every year they put out a publication called Freedom in the World. And they measure, nation by nation, territory by territory, how free is that particular nation. And they make some assertions about the trends, okay? And so the 2022 edition of that's just out, marked the 16th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. All right, 16 years in a row, by their measure, the degree of freedom in the world has been declining. Of the 195 independent countries that are assessed, 60 of those countries experienced declines in their freedom score, all right? They became less free, and only 25 became more free, all right? There are now 56 not free countries, accounting for about 40% of the world's population. It was the highest share since the decline began. Only 20% of the world's population now live in free countries, countries that were assessed to be free. So there's free, there's partially free, and there's not free, right? So they have those three levels. This is the lowest level since 1995. the COVID-19 pandemic, right? It gave a lot of these totalitarian nations an excuse to just sort of tighten the screws on their population, to tighten the level of scrutiny, observation, locking people down, restricting movement, et cetera. And so there was a jump in the number of the type of not free behavior during the pandemic. All right. Some of these not free nations, as you know, are pretty powerful nations, and some are nuclear nations. The United States here was not immune from this trend. All right. And over the past 10 years, on a scale of 1 to 100, the United States has fallen 10 points. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So to review, John, the geopolitical inflection point, power in many ways, military power, economic power, demographic power is shifting to the Indo-Pacific, to Asia. It's moving there. Politically, power is moving away from free nations. And this degree of freedom, the number of people living in free nations is declining. Freedom and democracy are on a decline and have been for some time. It's dramatic, right? As I said, there aren't many examples for these types of shifts in the world. You have to kind of go back almost to, well, one example would be the 1900s. And around the 1900s, we had a shift where the United States really succeeded the United Kingdom as the most powerful nation on the globe, right? The most powerful nation in the world. That was a relatively peaceful transfer of power because we shared so many of the same values, okay? Another example might be the 1950s, right? At the end of well, I'll tell you what, because the United States sort of came out on top of that, we did set the global agenda up until and through 2 world wars, winning both of those for the West, if you will, and setting the global agenda during that period of time, okay? Another example might be in the 1950s. At the end of the Second World War, the entire world collapsed from a multinational, multipolar type of a structure into that bipolar structure of the Cold War, right? There was the West and there was the Soviet Union, right, or the Warsaw Pact. And so, that's another example of where a geopolitical shift of this magnitude has happened. We're on the cusp of another one, okay? The rise of China, and it was talked about during the introduction. The persistence of Russia. I don't know if it's a resurgence or not, but it's certainly a persistent ability to inject mayhem into the international situation, and they're doing that in spades in Ukraine right now, okay? So, a geopolitical inflection point, a revolution, a strategic inflection point, just like Andy Grove talked. But wait, there's more. There's a technological inflection point going on, okay? The Congressman asked me to say a few words about the industrial base. We'll just talk a little bit about it now, and happy to explore more during the Q&A. And this happens when new technologies emerge that allow, and a lot of these new technologies are going to allow us to do things that we're doing right now, except we're going to be able to do them better and faster and cheaper. Okay? But what really makes it a revolution or an inflection point is some of the things that are happening right now in the technology world we actually couldn't do before. All right, these are new things, new capabilities that we just can't do. All right, so if you think about artificial intelligence, right? Who has been following ChatGPT? I mean, it's scary. I was talking to a shipmate of mine. We had breakfast today. He lives here in Dallas, and he follows it pretty closely. And if we have a little bit of time, it looks like the weather's holding. He said that one of the challenges that somebody gave to this ChatGPT robot was, here's $100 and start a business, okay? And ChatGPT got right to work on it, right? And so it starts looking around what are the best, opportunities. It picked a sector of the economy to start this business in, and then it started to look for loans, secure loans, and all those sorts of things. And you've seen it when you sign up for something. There's that little thing, are you a robot, right? And you got to check that, and I have to do it like 4 times because I can never find all of the bicycles or whatever, It's like, dang it, I missed it again? It's actually going to think I am a robot if I get this wrong one more time. But anyway, or the crosswalk, right? The crosswalk always kicks my butt too. But anyway, ChatGPT got to that point in the business startup. And instead of trying to go for it, it recognized the challenge, went out and found a human to hire, and hired a person to go in and do that part of the application, because it knew it would be busted if it answered as a robot, right? And so that's pretty clever. For a machine to do that independently, that's a capability. We haven't been able to do that with machines before. This is a capability we simply did not have before, right? In biology, I used to send some of our really up-and-coming leaders to a place in Silicon Valley called Singularity University. And they called it that, Singularity, because if you plot an exponential curve, eventually it kind of just goes straight up, right? And mathematically that's called a singularity, just this infinite height and vertical line, right? And it's run by a guy named Ray Kurzweil. And when I sent our team out there, our leaders, I thought they would learn about artificial intelligence and computers and all of that. They would come back and be stunned by all of the biotech that they learned about, right? And so, we just saw the Nobel Prize for Chemistry not too long ago be awarded for all of this gene splicing, molecule snapping, CRISPR, genome mapping, et cetera. That stuff is moving fast, right? The 100-year lifetime is right around the corner. The ethical implications of some of these biotech advances. Again, we're going to be able to do things in biotech that we simply could not do before because of these technologies. Another one that's interesting is quantum technologies, right? So this stuff is so crazy, quantum mechanics, that even Albert Einstein said, there's no way, right? Pretty smart dude. Turns out there's a way, okay? And you hear about quantum computing sometimes, and those are coming. I'll tell you, when they get here, they're going to be, there's a really interesting, I'm sorry, I'm kind of a nerd, so I'm nerding out with you guys, but I hope you find it a little bit interesting. There's a special class of problems that are characterized by being super, super hard to solve, right? Solve the problem. But when you look at the answer, in 2 seconds, you can say, yeah, that's right. It's sort of an interesting class of problem. Quantum cryptography and encryption is that type of a problem, right? Very, very hard to decrypt a well-encrypted code, but as soon as you do, you run it through and in 2 seconds, that's the right answer. Quantum computers are really good at those types of problems and getting better, okay? So think about every piece of information that everybody in this room has that's currently encrypted being unencrypted or decrypted and really effortless, all right? That's around the corner. But then that's just the computing, right? There's also quantum sensing, which is going to revolutionize medical technology, quantum navigation by mapping the magnetic field of the Earth, communication, it's again, things we can do with those technologies we simply could not do before, right? And so there's much more to this than just the engineering geeky challenge. It's fun to talk about that, but the team that fields these technologies first wins. And there are national security implications to getting these things right. And 25 years of being the sole superpower has not done a lot for our ability to get things done quick, okay? We've got to work on that. we're falling further behind, right, our competitors. And it's not because a lack of creativity or innovation. I think we still maintain, just like when Andy Grove came to the United States, because this was the place to learn fast and make your living. It's still that way. But getting that stuff into the hands of our national security apparatus has been slowing down, okay? And some of these technologies are decisive, doing things we couldn't do before, and which will render a lot of what we're doing completely obsolete, right? So we're talking, you know, cavalry against tanks type of asymmetry. We've got to get this right. Okay, I'm going to skip. We could go deep on that if you want. Congressman, ready to answer your questions, okay? So just to talk about the second inflection point, strategic inflection point, is this technology. We can do so much of what we're doing now better, faster, cheaper, but some things, very important things that we will be able to do very soon, we just couldn't be able to do before. All right? And the pace of our technology introduction has got to get much faster than we are right now. We must not only invent things, which we're best at, but we've got to be able to adapt them into our business. Okay? Again, very few examples of this type of technological revolutionary change, right? You've got right around that 1900 time frame I talked about earlier. Well, you also had the Industrial Revolution going on then, right? So the world moved from an agrarian society, farming and that sort of thing, to a mechanized society, an industrial society. And the nations that got that right and were able to integrate it into their national security strategy, the team of Western nations did that, and that helped them win. Again, just at the end of the World War II, the world collapsed into the Warsaw Pact in the West. Similarly, the technological introduction of the atomic age, the space age, and those sorts of things was, you know, happening at the same time. And the team that got that best, it helped them win. We've got to get this technology thing right. We need all the help we can get to help us win. Okay, the third inflection point, and this is brand new, hot off the press. It used to be just 2, and now it's 3. But I read this thing just recently, and this is our domestic situation, okay? And I just want to read some of these things off, and I'm going to grab my glasses here, if you pardon me. But it talks about the values that we hold dear as a nation, okay? And how our population, do they continue to hold them dear, is really the fundamental question. All right? Patriotism, okay? I think you absolutely appropriately mentioned our gratitude for the service of every veteran in the room. And you did mention the Vietnam War as a special case there. Could I just ask all of our Vietnam veterans to raise their hand, please? All right, let's give a round of applause and show our appreciation of that tonight. We've got a lot of time to make up with our Vietnam vets, and we shouldn't pass up an opportunity to do that. Okay, so this compares 1998 to today. Okay, those are the time frames. In 1998, in terms of patriotism, about 70% of the population in this poll said, yeah, that's really important. We hold that value dear in the United States. Today, that number is 38%. Religion, right? You were kind enough to share your calling card with me, right? And it talks about the importance of faith and spirituality in your life. In 1998, 62% of Americans polled said, we hold that dear. Today, 39%. Okay? Having children, right? Is that something that we think is important? It was about 60% in 98, and it's like 20% today. Okay? How about community involvement, doing something for the common good? All right. That was about 50% in 1998. And unique in all of these things, that one actually went up in about 2019 and 2020, but it is like 20% right now, where people feel some kind of a motivation to do something for the common good. On the other hand, the value of making money has gone from about 30% to 45% and climbing as sort of a prime value, okay? Yeah, another one, tolerance for others, kind of goes along with that community service. Deemed very important to 80% of Americans, even 4 years ago, has fallen to 58% and dropping since then, okay? And one last piece is that a lot of that drop is seen in our younger Americans, those Americans age 18 to 29, right? So this is our future that we're talking about here. And we have this great inflection point in terms of what we value. So what are we talking about? Let's just wrap all of this up and we can get to questions. We have not just one, but three simultaneous strategic inflection points happening, these singularities. And of course, you know, none of them are independent, right? They all impact each other. They all kind of influence each other, right? The technology advances are going to create opportunities for what we can do geopolitically and will influence our domestic situation, right? And similarly, the geopolitics, you know, they all interrelate, right? They'll all impact each other. The change is dramatic and quick, particularly if you get this wrong, okay? I mean, think of those businesses that really kind of were at the peak of their game and then were gone because they missed these inflection points. It's hard to see really conclusively into the future. How do we proceed in this environment? I'd love to hear your ideas. I'll throw some out just for consideration. I think, you know, the future will, we should maybe rely on certainly kind of recapturing a sense of our principles and our values. What can we do that? And then sort of stay on the balls of our feet and become fast learners, right? So that we can respond to those situations, whether we've been able to anticipate them or not, all right? Guided by our principles. I think that third inflection point about our domestic values is, you know, one of the more disturbing ones, because this is the team that's going to take our nation into the future. So, you know, with respect to technology, well, we have to continue to innovate and invent, and we have to get that assimilated into our national security structure. I think that, you know, learning faster than our adversaries in the technology business, absolutely essential. That's necessary, but not sufficient. Because you can learn fast and you can go down a path and you can end up in a very dark place, okay? And so this, you know, coming back to being guided by our principles, they serve as our fixed stars. And in our schools, in our PTAs, you know, every public institution, we've got to, one, do what we can to strengthen those public institutions back up, and two, inculcate, don't take anything for granted in terms of what, you know, their position is with respect to these values. You know, on the Great Seal of the United States, there's, on the front of it, e pluribus unum, from many, one. And we have to, just like that tolerance trend and this trend in community service, we have to come back together and do what's the best thing for us as one nation, all right? Under God, just like we said in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we are the home of the free, and we must reconnect with our founding principles. We have learned as a nation. We're still learning, right? We are not by any means the perfect team, But I'll tell you what, we're definitely the good guys, and we're committed to getting better, all right? This remains the land of opportunity, and the whole world looks to us for guidance. We need to step into that role, take that leading position, and we can do that. And we can do that and prosper and stay secure. You know, I got a keen sense as I travel around the world and talk to my counterparts in other navies that we're not the only ones that are watching these trends. And a lot of people who are our staunchest, most valued, reliable, long-standing allies are wondering, where do we stand now, right? Can we be depended on? We've got to show them that we stand for the principles that we've always stood for, and yes, one of those values is dependability. Okay, we've got to take our own side in this fight. The future literally hangs in the balance. You miss these strategic inflection points, and it's very, very difficult to recover from that mistake. Will we see our end, or are we going to reach unforeseen heights? I think that the answer to that lies in every room like this around the country. So what we do here in this room, the things that we talk about, and what we do when we leave this room is incredibly important. And I think that these trends show us that we just can't take for granted any of those things that are the keys to our success. We really have to go out and fight for them, all right? If we do that, I'm 1,000% optimistic that we're going to prevail, okay? But we got to go get after it. Got to put some energy into it. So with that, I'll say God bless all of you. Thank you again for having me. God bless the United States of America. Thanks. Sure. Just get it out of your way.
Chuck, could you find me a microphone for the Admiral?
Microphone over here.
Perfect.
Can you hear me if I talk like this? Yes. All right. So
All right, good.
microphones for the audience.
Okay. We got a few questions in early, and a lot of them are, you touched on the geopolitical aspects of what we're working on. And some of the questions centered on China, what's going on over there, China and Russia. Do you think that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are cooperating to confront the U.S. globally?
I think there's almost no doubt that they are. First of all, I want to say that I love the cards, the variety of questions on the cards, but I like it even better when I get to pick the questions. So the fact that you're throwing me all the fastballs, I would think they're softballs, right? No, I think that, so the question about, you've read a lot about the collaboration that's happening between Russia and China, right? And I mean, it's undeniable. They're doing, Xi Jinping just visited Moscow. Okay, now I think that dynamic is changing, and Russia's kind of becoming the little brother relationship. But
Give him the
it's
mic,
a
because he
relationship that
can't
didn't
hear
exist
there
before.
for
And I think the thing that brought them together was their shared desire to change the rules by which the world moves. Okay, and if they can bring Iran and North Korea into that.
We're going to get you on the tape.
Oh, okay. All right, is that better? If they can bring Iran, in particular Iran, right? It's like we were talking about real estate, location. Iran's in a very, very important location there at the Strait of Hormuz. And North Korea, just, I mean, what can you say? Hard to predict anything that's going to happen there. Their people are living in absolute poverty, and they're launching missiles into the Pacific, frequently. So yeah, I think, and they're supporting one another as well with technology, and so I think that it's almost clear, undeniable, that this is an alliance, if you will, or an arrangement anyway, that is centered around displacing the United States and this global order.
With the table set with that, let me ask you, what do you think, or do you think we have what we need to be able to protect our technology, particularly militarily, from our adversaries?
Yeah, I think we do. In fact, one of the things that I'm involved in right now is, you may have heard this idea to try and help Australia get a nuclear-powered submarine. Okay, AUKUS is the term of art, and the United Kingdom is the other nation. So the three nations are helping, and so we've got very well understood and strict rules in place for technology sharing and those sorts of things. What we have to be super careful about is cyber theft, right? Just the theft of intellectual property by cyber criminals. That has, take a look at, if you want to, just the pictures of the Chinese advanced aircraft, okay? They're newer generation aircraft. You'll recognize them because they look like ours, right? I mean, like the spitting image. All right, because they've stolen the plans, and it not only speeds things up, but the cost avoidance that they achieve by not having to do all of that research and development on their own is huge, right? So we've got to be able to do better in cybersecurity, and there's a lot of efforts going on about, in that area. And then when we want to share technology, like with our close allies, some reforms in those rules, that rule set, that would, employ 21st century techniques to continue to secure it, right? I'm not talking about opening the gates and letting everybody out or in, but the ability to share with more agility would help move the team along faster, and I think would be the best, to the better of all.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit now and talk about your time when you were with the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah.
As an advisor to SecDef and the President, what are your thoughts about how effective the Joint Chiefs currently are in the process we're talking about, and these inflection points, and any predictions about who the next chairman might be?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, this would just be one person's guess. And
Yeah.
with respect to the next chairman, I'm not even going to hypothesize on that. It's a process that is involves a lot of people in nominations, consideration. It's a very careful process, and they'll find the right person. With respect to the Joint Staff, the JCS and the Joint Staff, I would have to say it's one of the most effective staffs in the world. Those folks can get some things done, when they're properly led. The question and the problem is well defined. They unleash the staff on that. They've got some pretty smart people. They work like crazy hard, and get things done. So.
And they're working on some of these same inflection points you're talking about all the time. One of the questions that came up that comes up a lot when we have these meetings is talking about our junior officers and bringing our future leaders along in the military.
Right.
What do you see as the biggest challenge with regard to developing leaders in the Navy?
Yeah. I'll just say developing leaders. I bet, every business person in the room, or school teacher, or anybody who's dealing with this challenge, right? And here's our future right over here, right? And what we found in the Navy is that as those young people came in, and just in the Navy, we trained 40,000 young sailors a year. They come through boot camp up in Great Lakes, Illinois, and so that's a lot. By every measure, right? Their test scores, their grades, even their physical scores. Once we got them training, it's about the most capable Navy we've ever had by those measures. Having said that, I would say, and you know what, it's fun, here's a fun time, it's fun to be around for a long time. And so a lot of times I would be standing in front of a big crowd of sailors, and the master chiefs or something would stand up and say, young people, I mean, they're just weak, and they can't hack it, and I'm really worried. I was like, Master Chief, you know what? I've been around long enough that I remember when people said that about you, right? And it all turned out okay. And I think that that's the way, I have great optimism, right? Now the starting point, as we saw from that, that survey that was done, the starting point where each one of those young people start, it's different than the starting point when we were growing up, right? I mean, I was brought up in a certain family, and it was tough love in my family, right? And so when I went to that summer boot camp at the Naval Academy, that was pretty good living for me. I mean, my own bed, 3 square meals. I'm happy to run around for a little while and do all that, marching and shouting, whatever. That's not the case. That's not the starting point many of our young people have right now. Okay, so we just have to adapt to that, right? And okay, we're going to start we know the end point of this journey. You're going to be an effective, tough, resilient sailor, right? Who's ready to join a crew and contribute to that crew as a fighting element. But I'm mindful that there's a huge variety of where people start on that journey. Some come from stable families. Many don't. Some people are running to the Navy because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Many are running away from something and are just looking for some place to go, right? We have to be respectful of all of that. And so it was an interesting thing, just kind of continue to talk about this because it's so important. One of the things I did when I was when I got to be the CNO, the Chief of the Navy, was you go out and you talk to a lot of sailors. And it's the same, for the Army. You talk to soldiers, you get a real good sense of what's going on. And I got this vibe like, hey, you're a brand new young sailor, fresh out of boot camp. How did it go? Well, it was easy. It's like, what? And I was like, kind of parked that away. 2 or 3 sailors all telling me, yeah, it was all right. It wasn't too hard. It's like, okay, so now I'm going up to boot camp. But show me what's going on up here. And we actually decided to make boot camp more challenging. All right, we took a look at what do people really need to learn, some basic life skills that we took for granted before. Okay, so we added some time to address that. And we made it harder. We made it harder physically, we made it harder academically, and everybody's like, oh, CNO, this is gonna be a disaster, right? Everybody will bail out. They rose to the occasion and surprised us all. And so the graduation rates went way up. The attrition rates went way down. Even the day-to-day, like I don't feel, well today, right? That throws a wrench into every teacher knows that, right? If you're absent, you got to make it up somehow. And the schedule's pretty compact. All of that type of stuff went way down. Our young people, they want to be challenged. They want to be challenged. They want to be taught about these values that we talked about. So we shouldn't flinch from respecting them in that way and getting them on that journey to build that soldier, sailor, airman, Marine that we need them to be.
That's great. We had a great follow-on question from one of our Marine cadets, but I think he answered that pretty well, don't you think? Or we need to follow on with that?
I rambled quite a bit on that one. I don't know if I have anything more to say. So.
Okay, talking about specific U.S. military capabilities against our adversaries, do you view, and this gets back to China, do you view the capability of Chinese missiles to render our carriers obsolete?
No. Okay. I was kind of following you with Chinese missiles and da-da-da, and then it's like our carrier is obsolete, and the answer to that is absolutely no. If you think about what, and it's not just a carrier, right? You have to understand a carrier is just one element in a system of systems. And if you operate that system poorly, well, you're going to pay the price for that. But if you're well trained and you operate that system properly, cleverly, then you're going to be able to inflict an awful lot of pain on anybody who wants to come up against that. All right? Now, a lot of that advantage and techniques and everything are very, very classified, as you can imagine. And so you got to get into the right room with the right people and all of that to talk about it. And there's no doubt that after 1991, when we sent a number of strike groups around Taiwan, the Chinese took note of that, and they started, addressing capabilities that would directly counter the carrier strike group. And so, but that's only one part of the match, right? So, just like in a tennis match, somebody serves, and somebody returns. And back and forth it goes. And so, the capability has been back and forth. It's been happening since Henry V won at Agincourt, right? Shakespeare wrote about that. They had the longer and more accurate bowmen, right? So they had accuracy at a distance. And that's the way it goes today, right? And so, a well-resourced, well-run carrier strike group it brings a military air wing into theater. It's a runway, an airfield that can move 600 miles a day. Okay? Easy. All the other ones on land, I've got the GPS coordinates for those, and they're not going anywhere. Right? So there's a vital contribution. It's a team effort. It takes everything, and the strike group's a big part of that.
Well, to follow on with that, this is a question that I've seen in a lot of different...
Can I just put one last thing on that?
Sure.
We need to build them cheaper, right? We need to build them less expensively, okay?
Can you comment on that recent CSIS Pacific War Games where it showed massive losses?
Yeah. Well, one takeaway from that war game is we should all want to be the world's experts at not fighting China, right? Because no matter which way that goes, the destructive power of the current inventory of weapons at that level of conflict is massive, okay? China's a nuclear power, and so there's that to consider. But even in the conventional inventory, the capability of those weapon systems is incredible. You do not want to get into a high-end fight. Now, how do you avoid that? Well, you avoid that by, just as George Washington said, the best way to deter war is to be just absolutely, unambiguously ready to win it, okay? And so we just want to have the military and the national will and all of the economic power, et cetera, all dimensions of national power, that anybody who wants to look over the South China Sea says, you know what, not today. It just is not going to happen today because it won't come out, it won't go our way. And so this is why we need to continue to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Shift gears to Russia. You mentioned earlier that you've traveled around the world and talked to navies all over the world. Let's talk a little bit about Russian submarine power in particular.
Yeah.
Their strategic and attack boats,
Right.
and their capabilities compared to ours, perhaps.
Yeah. Hands down. Okay, I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to come back and comment on what I just said, okay? The United States submarine force, the undersea warfare component of your Navy, is the most effective destructive force that the world has ever seen. Okay? It is. The combination of the attack submarines, which can just put entire navies on the bottom, and the strategic missile submarines which, as I talked about on the one I served, carried just tremendous destructive power. It's undeniable. Now, I'm going to comment on that. Every time I hear somebody say that, I get nervous because this is always, like I said, it's back and forth, right? And the minute you say things like that, people kind of say, okay, well, good. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to have a cup of coffee because you just told me there's nothing to worry about. Wrong, right? You've got to constantly fight, innovate, invest, train, operate to stay the best, not only in submarines, that's what you asked me about, but also in every other thing, right? And so this is where we need to kind of continue to work hard to keep our edge. And if you ever see, people love to say that. This is the American military is the greatest fighting force that the world has ever known. Okay, true. Let's stop saying that and just get to work and keep, be humble and do everything we can to stay the most effective fighting force that the world has ever known, right? So, speak softly and carry a big stick, right? It's kind of the way I like to think about it. Right.
I've just got 2 or 3 more here, so are there any questions from the floor? Could you grab a microphone, or do we have a mic? Who's got the mic? Bob?
We'll share.
Actually, I was going to ask that maybe the question I'm going to ask you, Admiral, is probably what the last question of the night, and I know if you still got some others, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. Everything you shared with us, and as a news broadcaster, knowing what goes on in the world on a daily basis, and some of the things that you said, the way it used to be and the way it is now, and you gave us all those statistics about values and about I just sat here and said, oh my gosh. And then you talked about the age 18 to 29 and how things are so much different now than they used to be. So my question is 2-part. First thing, excuse me, what are the 3 things that you, who has seen this for decades, what it is today and what it used to be, the 3 biggest concerns you have about all of us being citizens in this great country that we all call home. And the last thing is, the second part of my question, is we walk out these doors tonight, what is the one takeaway that you want us to share with our friends, with our neighbors, with our families about this is where we are today in 2023, and this is what we really need to focus on?
That's the mic drop. That's the mic drop question. Holy cow. Concerns. That value concern, that third inflection point that I talked about in values, I just, that's a recent poll that the Wall Street Journal and this outfit in the University of Chicago did, okay? And that was troubling to me, right? Because in many ways, one of the things that hopefully many of you young people will do someday, and many of us in this room, we're united by the fact that we took an oath of office, right? And with all of the choices that we had and all of the choices that you will have, so many of us chose to raise our right hand and take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, right? That oath was a reflection of our values, okay? That value, I think, it was directly addressed. This value to invest in the community and in the common good, okay? And it comes at great sacrifice, right? I used to marvel at it in the Navy because, as I said, we had a very, very talented Navy. And for all of you in business, you know that competition for people that talented is fierce. And I couldn't compete on salary, right? I mean, I just couldn't pay them as much as they could get in the private sector. And oh, by the way, as a bonus, you get to go to sea for 7 months a year, right? Separate from your family or deploy as a soldier or whatever it is. And yet, it happened. It happened because of their values. Okay, so we don't take too many of those oaths in our lives, right? Some of us took that oath of office. Many of us in here took an oath of matrimony, right? We committed to our spouses. Many of us have taken something like a baptismal vow, right, where we commit to our faith. For me, that's about it. 3 oaths. And yet, I can't think of a single decision that wasn't a major decision, that wasn't done really so that it was done consistent with my commitment to one of those or more than one of those 3 oaths, right? That's the value structure that is so important and will serve as that motive force going forward. And when times get tough, well, permission granted to be tougher, right? And your values, what you value is going to keep you in that fight, all right? And when I see our values starting to erode that dramatically, then I wonder about our ability to kind of duke this out going forward. It's going to be hard, right? Anybody see that movie Coach Carter? I love sports movies. Anyway, this Coach Carter, there's a basketball team in Los Angeles, and it's a classic story, and they go from kind of a rags to riches, and they end up in the state championship in California, and they've worked really hard, and the coach is Samuel Jackson, yep. He says, hey, look, at the moment during the championship game, and they've got, spooked by this team that's been the perennial champions forever. He's like, hey, just because we deserve to be here doesn't mean they're going to give it to us, right? We're going to have to go out and take it. And so that's kind of where I go to the second part of your question, right? So I wouldn't take it for granted anymore that we can coast on any kind of margin in the world right now. And I think that, of those 3 inflection points, kind of starting local, starting at home, investing in those values, investing in our toughness, in our schools, et cetera, coming together as a people to bring that binding energy and really crank it up. Start here. The rest will fall into place a lot easier than if we continue to kind of snipe and grouse at one another at every little thing. And so your takeaway, hold on, I'm not done yet. So your takeaway, since you asked, is just, hey, don't miss an opportunity to strengthen our values. We started this session with a Pledge of Allegiance. I love the words in that Pledge of Allegiance, right? I've done that in other ones where it's not on the agenda. And it's like, hey, I'll be the speaker. Before we go any further, can we all just stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? It's like, it's important for us to do that. We've stopped teaching civics in a lot of our schools. People don't know how the government works, right? All of these things are really important for us as a nation. This democracy is a lot more fragile than we might think on a day-to-day basis. We got to go out and fight for it every day. So let's not miss an opportunity to do that. All right. Okay,
Great.
back here?
Back here.
Better be a good one.
One, what do you think is holding us back from accelerating the implementation of technology? The second one is, what do you think is causing the decline in moral values?
Okay, so just for the record, what can help us accelerate technology? What's causing our difficulties there? And what about this moral decline? What's causing that? First one I know a little bit about. Second one, we're all on equal footing on that one, right? I'm not a social scientist, and so there's probably people in this room that can answer that one way better than me. The congressman is, that's his world, right? Is social science, understanding people. Anyway, I think that it's an interesting question about technology, and I'll just talk about the military part of it. I got a chance to testify before Congress and talk to a lot of people about this because that's a lot of what, my team did. And when I was asked one time to say, hey, come up and give us your views on this, I thought, well, okay. And I said, we're going to need, some more acquisition authorities, and I need to, do this and this and this. And that, as I studied it, I found that, a lot of that was kind of in place. And if I hadn't studied it, just gone in and shot off my mouth, I would have been open to the very legitimate question, well, you're not using the ones you already have, right? So what's up with that? But what we don't have, I think, are clear lines of authority and accountability, right? So it takes a huge team to get anything done. And it's very hard to find the person who is put in charge, right? So I used to talk about, I used to go to the places where they teach how to assimilate technology, Defense Acquisition University, okay? And I would kind of lean into them. And I would use this number in my talk, 10,000, okay? 10,000 is kind of a number that gets a lot of attention. If you're an Edison fan, Thomas Edison, you probably are very familiar that it took him 10,000 tries to finally build that light bulb that worked, right? And everybody was riding him during that, you're failing 10,000 times. He's like, no, I'm not failing. I'm just learning. It's 10,000 ways not to build a light bulb. I learned on that, and I finally built it. So there's that 10,000 number. Then if you've read any of Malcolm Gladwell's work, there's this, hey, I need 10,000 hours, practicing something to become an expert, right? So if I want to be a maestro in a piano, I need, to practice for 10,000 hours, and there's some research behind that. So there's that, right, number where 10,000 is kicked around. I said, my life, I need 10,000 PowerPoint briefs before I can kind of get anybody to line up behind me. 10,000, it was a bit of an exaggeration, but, not much, right? And so, I think we need to just kind of, it's more of a human organization problem than it is a legal authorities problem. We need to have much more business-like practices, and very mindful that the Congress is our board of directors, and we've got to go over there and make our case to the Congress, and they will approve the budget. That's the way our country works. It's fantastic. But the cleanest that we can do that, right? And take just a little bit easier to identify who the person in charge is. Maybe leave them there until there's a programmatic milestone that matters, rather than just this conveyor belt of people that go in and out every 2 or 3 years. This type of thing is very natural to all of the business people in the room, but it's not necessarily, so it's a human resources problem, I think, just to kind of summarize it. Yeah. With respect to the values, we can all speculate together, right? There's been a lot of things. Another thing we didn't talk about is sort of the pervasive social media that a lot of our, everybody, in particular our young people, are really tied up in. What the long-term impact of that might be, I don't know, but it's got my attention for sure, right? So things like that, I think, the pandemic didn't help, right? Everybody's kind of in their homes, and I'm kind of a person that thinks there's a lot of value to coming together. I'm really appreciative that you all came here to actually be here, and we didn't do this on Zoom or whatever. I think there's real value to that, right? And so, anyway, how about if we stop there? Is that okay?
That's exactly what I had in mind.
Yeah. All right, so.
Yeah. In the interest of time and the weather, we'll stop there. Admiral Richardson, I'm sure you wouldn't mind sticking around a little while for a few more.
Happy to.
We did have a few more questions, and I know that he'll be happy to stick around and answer some of those if need be. So thank you for your remarks. Thank you for the insightful responses. Just sit right here. If you'll remain on the stage, we're going to turn the floor back over to Scott.
It's very awkward just to be the only person sitting at this table.
Scott.
What'd you think? They did a great job, didn't they?